A few years ago, a mother and father decided they needed a break, so they wanted to head out for a night on the town. They called their most trusted babysitter. When the babysitter arrived, the two children were already fast asleep in bed. So the babysitter just got to sit around and make sure everything was okay with the children. Later that night, the babysitter got bored and went to watch TV. But she couldn't watch it downstairs because they did not have cable downstairs. The parents didn't want children watching too much garbage. So, she called them and asked them if she could watch cable in the parents' room. Of course, the parents said it was okay, but the babysitter had one final request. She asked if she could cover up the angel statue outside the bedroom window with a blanket or cloth, because it made her nervous. The phone line was silent for a moment, and the father, who was talking to the babysitter at the time, said, "Take the children and get out of the house, and we'll call the police. We don't own an angel statue." The police found both of the children and the babysitter slumped in pools of their own blood within 3 minutes of the call. No statue was found. It was in early November of 1997 that a series of very strange sessions led a child psychologist in Maine to contact the authorities. It began when a patient of his began to tell him about one of their friends. This friend being imaginary as far as both the psychiatrist and the boy's parents were concerned. He called his friend Mr. Smile and would talk about him at great length during some sessions. The boy called him Mr. Smile both because he would always be smiling and because when he was around the boy said everything felt happy. He said that there was a feeling of everything being okay. The boy in question was being treated for serious issues to do with anger and depression, but when Mr. Smile was around he said that all the anger and the sadness seemed to just disappear. He said that Mr. Smile wouldn't speak but rather just stand there at the foot of his bed. He smelled like candy floss, and just by being there he made the boy feel calm and safe. The psychiatrist assumed this imaginary friend was some sort of coping mechanism the boy had developed to deal with the problems at home that had led to his violent temper, and thought nothing much of it. Until another patient, a girl of about 9 years old, also began talking about her imaginary friend Mr. Smile, and then a boy of 7, and then a boy of 12. And then a girl of 11. All in all, close to 15 separate patients all began to talk to him about Mr. Smile. The first few he put down to coincidence. After all, many children have imaginary friends, and the name and description of Mr. Smile were just generic enough that it didn't concern him too much at first. But as more and more of his patients told him about Mr. Smile, he began to grow concerned. He asked for more details. Every single one of them described him the same way, using the exact same words. Now there was no way that all of these children could be in contact with each other. 5 of them, for instance, were currently being homeschooled, and according to their parents, when he spoke to them, never really even left the house, except when it was to accompany them on shopping trips and the like. There was no way that every single one of these kids could have rehearsed or prepared their statements together, which led him to a deeply disturbing conclusion. He spoke privately with each of the children's parents one at a time. He avoided disclosing too much information, but told them that something troubling had cropped up in multiple sessions with various patients, and that he believed that there was a chance their child was at risk. He asked for their permission to discuss matters with the authorities, and the parents gave their consent, provided they were kept in the loop as to what was going on. And so, over the course of the next week, the police came and talked to the children about their friend. They asked for details about his appearance, which they couldn't seem to describe apart from the smile, and that he was not like them. How he got into their house, anything he said or did while he was there. Because by this point the psychiatrist, the parents and the police were all convinced that Mr. Smile was quite real and quite dangerous. The authorities had checked to make sure there were no known predators living in the area, which they had confirmed was not the case. But it was quite clear that whoever this Mr. Smile was, he was a real person who had been sneaking into the homes of these children at night. None of the children claimed to know how he got in. They said they would just wake up and he'd be there at the foot of their bed. Sometimes they said he would be singing something, but not in English. It sounded like a lullaby, they said. It made them feel safe. Finally, the children were asked to draw Mr. Smile, as they couldn't put into words how he looked. Each and every one of the children picked up a red crayon and proceeded to color in the entire page until it was just a rectangle of red. When asked about this, they insisted that they had drawn Mr. Smile. When asked where his head, arms, and legs were, they would insist that they had drawn those. They claimed that they had drawn a perfect picture of the man at the foot of their bed, and when they were told that they had simply colored in the page and not drawn anything at all, they became deeply angry, feeling that they were being accused of lying and insisting that what they had drawn was a picture of the man they had seen. Acting more on a hunch than anything else, the psychiatrist decided to show one of the colored-in rectangles to the various children and ask them what it was. Each and every one of them, with no knowledge of what the picture was supposed to be or who had drawn it, and with no knowledge that the other children that had been spoken to about this subject even existed, replied that it was a picture of Mr. Smile. Cameras and baby monitors were placed in the children's rooms so that they could be monitored. Many of the parents simply stopped sleeping altogether, staying up all night staring at the screens that displayed where their children slept. At no point did anyone enter or exit the bedrooms. No sounds except for them snoring or occasionally talking in their sleep were heard over the baby monitors. There was no sign of Mr. Smile. After almost 2 weeks of this, many of them began to doubt that Mr. Smile had ever existed. Other psychiatrists since have put the whole thing down to some strange shared delusion that, while it couldn't be explained yet, did not have any basis in reality. Some suggested that maybe this whole Mr. Smile thing had its basis in a TV show or film that the children had all watched, leading them all to dream up something similar. Then one of the boys went missing. The camera in his room had gone dead at around 2 in the morning. His mother had run to check in on him only to find his room empty. It had literally taken her less than a minute to run to his room. There was no possible way for him to leave or be taken and be out of her sight in the time it took her to leave her bedroom and run towards his, but he was gone. She said there was a smell like cotton candy in the room. The search for the boy turned up nothing. No one had seen anything strange or unusual around the home before or during the disappearance, and no trace of him was ever found. It was less than a week later that one of the girls who had spoken of Mr. Smile vanished as well. Then another of the boys. One by one, each of them began to disappear, until only 4 remained. The 4 remaining children began to talk about how Mr. Smile and his friends were going to take them away soon. When asked about these friends, they talked about how Mr. Smile lived with the other smiling men in the happy place, and that he would take them there soon. They said that there were lots of people there already, and that in the happy place everything was beautiful. They said that they knew about it because Mr. Smile talked to them in their heads because he couldn't talk like other people did, and that he would show them pictures in their heads of the place they were going. Things began to get increasingly disturbing. After a few weeks, the children began complaining of headaches and nausea. Their schools reported that they had begun to suffer hallucinations, and 2 of them started complaining that they didn't like the place that Mr. Smile was showing them anymore. One began screaming for half an hour, acting as if they were having a fit and screaming for the colors to stop, that the colors were horrible, and that they needed them to go away. One of the children claimed that Mr. Smile was talking to them in their head all the time now and was telling them things, terrible things, but that they couldn't talk about it, that they mustn't because then their parents would know about the terrible things too. The psychiatrist asked them to write down what Mr. Smile was saying, promising that he would show it to no one, managing to gain the trust of one of the boys enough that he agreed. The contents of the book are known only to him and the authorities, but whenever anyone involved has been asked about it, they just get real quiet and quickly find an excuse to change the subject. The children stopped sleeping. Footage from the security cameras showed them sitting bolt upright, their eyes unblinking, just staring at the wall without moving or making a sound. Sedatives did nothing. One of the girls began cutting strange circular marks into her skin, while 2 of the boys ceased communicating in English altogether. The language they spoke was never identified, and despite numerous people being asked to listen to them, they could not translate what they were saying. By the start of 1999, all 4 of the children had vanished into thin air. There was no trace of who took them. Searches have turned up nothing to this day, with no indication of where they are or if they're even dead or alive. No suspects have ever been found either. All 4 of them appeared to simply vanish into thin air, much like the others, all of whom also remain missing, their disappearances unexplained. The little girl stood outside the door. She stared at it, fidgeting with the frills of her dress. She could always wait until tomorrow. No, she had to ask now. She wanted it, and she knew she wasn't going to change her mind anytime soon. Stepping forward, she knocked on the door. Her small hand seemed to disappear in the shadow of the dark aged wood. She heard a voice from behind the door. "Come in." She reached up on her tippy toes to grab the handle of the door and turned it. The sheer weight on the door worked in her favor, and it swung open. She stepped through the open door into the brightly lit room. Inside, at the far end of the room, sat a large desk. At the large desk sat a man. He was going over papers, shuffling them around, and making quick notations with a shiny silver pen. The girl marched up to the man sitting at the desk. "I want a doggy," the little girl said, or rather, shouted at the man. From the look on his face, this was not the first time they had had the conversation they were about to have again. "Sweetheart, what did I tell you last time?" he asked. The child was taken aback by the question. There was usually screaming on both sides by now. You said that I wasn't responsible enough last time. The unfortunate incident with the goldfish, yes. And if you weren't able to take care of a goldfish, I'm not sure you'd be able to handle a dog. But. Tears were welling in the young girl's eyes as she sputtered. The man, who was now facing her in his swivel chair, creaked the chair forward, and held the child's face in his hands. "Here's what we're gonna do, sweetheart. I'm going to give you 2 weeks to prove how responsible you are. Getting up for school, packing your own lunch, being in bed by bedtime. If you can do that for me, without me having to remind you, for 2 weeks, I'll get you a dog." Her tiny face seemed to explode in sparkles of joy. "You really mean it?" "Yes, but it's 2 whole weeks. That's 14 days. You think you can do it?" She placed her hands square on her hips, her face scrunched in determination. Okay, the next 2 weeks were tense and arguably the longest of her life so far. She cut it close, but he never had to remind her, with the exception of having to intervene when she tried to make peanut butter by smashing peanuts and margarine together with a hammer she found. Everything went surprisingly smooth. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," she shouted. "Yes," the man answered, not looking up from his work at the desk. "It's been 2 weeks," she said triumphantly, and the man asked, seeming to lead the witness, "And I did everything you told me to." "You did?" He swiveled around in mock surprise. "Yes." She smiled expectantly. I don't know. I think maybe we should go for another 2 weeks just to be sure." The little girl's face fell. "Oh, all right." The man scratched his chin. "Now, what was I gonna get you?" "Oh, I remember. A baseball." "Right," the girl laughed. "No, Daddy, not a baseball." "Well, then I was probably gonna get you a scooter." The girl laughed even harder. "No, Daddy, not a scooter." He threw his hands up in mock exasperation. "Well, if it's not a baseball and it's not a scooter, what could it possibly be?" "A doggy," the girl shouted. He smiled warmly at the girl. "A doggy? Of course. Let's get moving. Come on." To the pet store. Getting up from his desk, the man took the girl's small hand in his and led her out of the room. They walked the length of the hallway and then made their way down the stairs to the first floor. The girl hummed a song she made up. Once on the first floor, the man led her to the door of the basement. A small plastic sign reading "Pet Store" hung next to the light switch. He opened the door to almost complete darkness, save for a small red light in the distance. He flicked the switch and light burst from the large panels that lined the ceiling, revealing a long staircase. At the bottom of the stairs was a steel door. Beside the door was a small keypad, a red light burning on its display. "Remember, sweetheart, it's a long way down, so watch your step," he warned her. Gingerly, he took the small girl's hand and guided her down the stairs. As she carefully maneuvered the steep steps, the girl thought about all the things she would do with her new dog. Playing catch, walks in the park. She hadn't even thought about what to name it. She was just so excited. Once they reached the imposing steel door, the man punched in a few numbers on the keypad. The sound of the beeps echoed. The red light on the keypad disappeared for a moment, and a green one took its place. Smiling, the man released the girl's hand and grabbed the large handle of the steel door and wrenched it open. With the door open, the barking reached their ears. After a few steps, the smell hit them as well. It was bad, but the girl knew that if that was what she had to put up with to have a doggy, she'd get used to it. After several more flights of stairs and a slight drop in temperature, they touched down onto smooth concrete. The barking was much louder now. The sounds of dozens of dogs, all varying sizes and volumes. The little girl was so excited she was shaking. She immediately made a beeline for the first cage she saw and asked, "Is that my doggy?" pointing inside. The man laughed. "No, no. I've got one picked out special. Just for you." He led her over to a section of the kennel towards the back. "Now, I just found this one, so he's a little scared," the man said. The girl stared into the cage for a moment. After a time, her face warped with disappointment. "Why doesn't he look right?" she asked. "Well, I usually groom them right away, but you were so excited, I decided it could wait," the man explained. "Is he asleep?" she asked. "Probably. He's very tired. He had a long trip. Can we wake him up?" the girl asked in hushed tones. "Just for a few minutes, and then he needs to rest." "Okay." The little girl took a few steps forward and lightly rapped on the metal bars of the cage, the sound bouncing around under the high ceilings. Who's there? Please, I just want to see my family." The little girl's nose wrinkled in disapproval. "Well, he doesn't sound like a doggy at all." The man's eyes remained warm as he pulled the small remote out of his pocket. "No, he doesn't. Whoever is there, I'll give you whatever you want." You want money?" "I don't have a lot." "Boo." The voice was replaced by violent, tortured screams. The man's eyes never left the cage as he released the pressure of his thumb from the small remote. "What are doggies who don't sound like doggies, sweetheart?" The girl replied instantly, "Bad doggies. And we don't want bad doggies, do we? No. Only good doggies. Please. I'll do anything. Just stow." The voice was cut off again and a reprise of screams was heard. After a few seconds, the man released his thumb once more. Only heavy, pained breathing was heard from the cage. Suddenly, loud guttural barking was heard. The little girl clapped her hands as she jumped up and down. "Oh, thank you, Daddy. Thank you so much. I knew you'd get me a real doggy. I knew you would." "You're very welcome, sweetheart. Now you go upstairs and pick out a leash. Just make sure it's a bright color so we can find him if he gets loose at night." Okay. Happiness was radiating off the small girl like a space heater, and she made her way towards the stairs. Past the cages of men in various states of starvation barking as loudly as they could. Past the men painted black, yellow, or brown with fur painfully stitched to their skin. Past the large tank of water with the man in the orange wetsuit floating at the top outfitted with makeshift scuba gear. As she put one foot on the stairs to start her ascent, she stopped. She turned around and placed a hand on the tank, watching the decaying body bob in the filthy water. "I'm sorry I forgot to feed you, Mr. Fish. I won't forget to feed my doggy." Then she turned around and dashed up the stairs. She couldn't wait to play with her new doggy. Cryptozoology has always been a minor interest of mine. I say minor because it was something I'd only enjoyed casually. A few internet articles here and there, scrolling through a couple of pages on a Tumblr blog dedicated to it. Maybe watching one of those Bigfoot documentaries. You know, that kind of interest. Nothing serious. Generally, that would be pretty common for most people. Most people, however, do not live in my little town where a supposed cryptid is how many folks here make a living. See, I live in a small town in the UK, more specifically in the northwest of England. It's a tiny place not many people outside of the country have likely heard of. unless they've already been there for whatever reason or have an interest in cryptids. My small town is situated by one of the many lakes that dot this part of the country, and as so many bodies of water do, we have our own Loch Ness monster. So many people claim, anyway. I'm sure many of you are skeptical of that as you are of any such monster. Who can blame you? I grew up here, and I didn't buy into that. I found it interesting, but I didn't believe it. Same as I didn't believe those people who claim aliens probed their backsides or that Bigfoot had destroyed their camp. It was something to read about and enjoy, but not something I believed. Most of my generation and that of my parents felt the same, but many of my grandparents' era clung to the belief in the monster. They stayed away from the lake unless they were in decently sized boats or one of the many ferries that traveled the length of the lake to nearby settlements. Not us kids and teens though, especially not in summer. Most of the time, British summers are nothing to brag about. They're pretty warm, but usually cloudy or wet. Sometimes, however, we were blessed with a heat wave. Nothing was better than a dip in the lake during the heat of the day. During the school holidays, the older kids would hang out by the lake well into the evening. The worst that ever happened was that someone would get a cramp whilst swimming and we'd have to get them back to shore, or someone would get their foot tangled in some lake weed and freak out until they realized what it actually was. Nothing sinister, nothing serious. Most certainly, no lake monster. One particular day during the Easter break where it was much too cold to spend more than 5 minutes at a time in the lake, I was spending my time climbing the many tall trees that covered the areas around the lakes. Maybe I was a bit old for tree climbing, most likely, but it had always been something I'd enjoyed doing. Something about climbing as high as I could go and settling down on a sturdy branch, just looking over my surroundings, was something I enjoyed. Most of the time I'd just watch boats going up and down the lake, people going about their business, cars passing down the country roads. Just typical stuff not worthy of merit. But this day in spring was different. The day itself was like any other, a chilly but sunny day in late March. I'd already taken up my temporary church in an old oak, where I stay for an hour or so before going off to meet friends. From where I was perched, I could see 2 young kids, maybe around 8 or 9, playing down by the shore. They weren't close to the water, just sitting in the grassy area a little ways off the bank. 2 girls. I couldn't really see what they were doing beyond that general observation. This was nothing out of the ordinary. What was unusual was the large, dapple gray horse trotting along the shoreline towards them. Horses weren't exactly an unusual sight themselves out in a rural town, but they were usually in their fields or accompanied by a rider. There was no one else in sight, and this horse had no saddle, bridle, or any other sort of riding gear. There are no true wild horses in the United Kingdom, and the only semi-wild horses make their home in the New Forest, somewhere right at the other side of the country. That left the option of it having somehow gotten out of its field. For all it seemed weird to me, in hindsight it wasn't all that unusual. Tourists were always crossing through private land and leaving gates open. Animals were bound to get out on occasion. The kids took immediate notice of the animal, looking up from their chatter and letting out delighted squeals I could hear even from my spot up in the tree. I watched as they ran up to it, fearless as all children were, oblivious to the fact that if they spooked it, one kick from its front or back legs could shatter their developing bones. I watched as the pair gleefully pet the animal. The horse itself didn't seem to mind the attention, which led me to think it was one frequently used for riding. Most likely one of the horses rented out to tourists so they could enjoy a ride through the countryside. The horse lowered its head, allowing one of the kids to press a hand to its muzzle. I could hear their delighted laughter as the pair took turns alternating between stroking its flank and head. It was pretty cute, I have to admit. There is always something magical about an unfamiliar animal being content with your presence, with how calm this horse seemed to be. I didn't bat an eye as it lowered itself to the ground. The pair of kids seemed ecstatic about this, climbing onto the animal's back. Not exactly safe or smart, but kids don't really think like that. And I'm sure the horse would have made it very clear it didn't want them clambering all over it if it wanted to. It was a pretty damn big horse. It took me a few moments to realize the children were no longer letting out happy squeals and giggles. They were screaming. I couldn't understand why at first, but as my vision focused more on the horse, I knew how I hadn't noticed the change. I don't know, but where once it had been dapple gray, it was now black. The kind of black that seems to absorb all light around it, distorting it. It seemed to be dripping wet, even from my spot in the tree. I could see the tangled mess of its waterlogged mane and tail leaking water onto the ground. Its eyes were the worst of it. I shouldn't have been able to see them clearly from such a distance, but even in the dull spring sun, I could see the glowing from those sickening, milky eyes. It threw its head back, rising to its feet with the children still on its back. They were trying to get off, but they couldn't. I don't know how, and I'm sure they didn't know how either. But no matter how much they struggled and screamed, they couldn't get off of that horse. It was like they were superglued to it. I couldn't move from my spot, no matter how much my mind screamed at me to jump down and do something. Anything. I'm ashamed to admit fear consumed me. Sweat dripped down my brow as my breathing grew more rapid by the second. My heart was beating so hard and fast that it hurt. I have no proper words to describe the primal terror that gripped me, the same terror I imagine gripped our ancestors when confronted by a giant cave bear or an angry mammoth. Though where their fight or flight instinct would kick in, mine didn't. I was simply frozen as the beast charged towards the water, screaming children on its back, their cries not silenced until their heads dipped under the water that frothed and bubbled as they struggled beneath the surface. Then nothing. Just an eerie stillness on that spring morning. Not even the birds sang. I think they knew. Animals just know these things. I don't know how long I sat up in that tree just staring out over the water where that horse had vanished into the murk. I don't know what became of those kids, but I know they were never found and that they never will be. It was written off as accidental drowning. Their parents beat themselves up over it as any parent would. Nothing like this had ever happened before in our little community. Kids who grew up around the lake pretty much knew how to swim by the time they could walk, and they knew to be careful by the water. It didn't add up, of course, but beyond that, no one could explain it. I think the parents cling to the hope that their children simply ran away or were kidnapped, so that they might one day find them again, and I can't blame them for that. I never told anyone what I saw. No one would have believed me anyway, save for a few ancient crones nobody took seriously, who frequently babbled about ghosts and ghouls. It haunts me that I did nothing, that I simply watched as those innocent children were pulled into a watery grave. I never went into the lake after that. To anyone that asked, I simply said that I didn't like the way the smell of the lake water clung to me. I didn't think I'd ever tell this story, but I still live in this town over a decade later, and last night I saw a dapple gray horse stalking along the lakeside. Some people call me a hero. I can't disagree with them, because it's actually kind of true. Believe it or not, I've saved a drowning man, pulled a girl from a burning building, and I even saved a dog from being swept away by a nasty flood. My friends thought I was crazy, but I thought I was just exercising my humanity. That and I was kind of an adrenaline junkie. It was my guilty pleasure. I've been skydiving and bungee jumping on more than one occasion. I've jumped off the ledge of a huge waterfall hoping that I didn't hit shallow water. I've got a couple of scars to show for my endeavors. I don't really do the adventurous things that I used to anymore. Not after what happened about 7 years ago. A couple of friends and I were just heading out from a New Year's party. It was freezing outside, and we had to walk 6 blocks to get back to our dorms. We all started walking, dreading the next 20 minutes or so of -20-degree weather. "Hey, wait a minute," Gerard said in his drunken stammer. "It'd be faster if we cut through the park." We all took a moment to think about it. The city made it a point to close the park down for some reason. Something about there being too many hazards, like falling trees or people drowning in the pond. Michelle cringed at the thought of walking through a knockoff cemetery. Gerard, Elijah, and I chuckled at her. The cold wind blew and stung my cheeks. It would save us an extra 18 minutes, so we decided to go through the park. We quickly made our way to the entrance, hopped the gate, and started walking. It was quite beautiful at 2 in the morning. The light from the moon glistened off of the frost that clung to the tree branches. I remembered walking through this park with my parents as a child, walking by the pond in the summertime to see tourists in their rented boats, enjoying the day. I was kind of excited to see what the pond would look like in the moonlight. It had been so long since I'd seen it, let alone in the middle of winter and in the dead of night. It would have been a very peaceful walk if Michelle and Gerard weren't rambling on about who could drink more and not puke all over everybody. Since Elijah and I were the 2 most sober people of the group, we held them up and made sure they didn't slip on the path and crack their heads open. We approached the pond, and it looked absolutely stunning in the moonlight, even better than I remembered. We all stopped to take in the beautiful view when Michelle noticed something. "What the hell is that?" she queried, pointing to something out on the ice. We all looked closely and saw something that, I'm pretty sure, made all our hearts jump into our throats. A little girl stuck out on the frozen wasteland. In a panic, we immediately ran towards the water's edge, cell phones at the ready. Elijah was the first to get anybody on the line. She frantically told the officer what was going on. All the while, the girl was just standing there, not moving, not shouting out for help. "Are you okay?" I shouted, cupping my hands around my mouth to amplify my voice. She still stood there in silence. While we panicked on the shoreline, I heard something faint, but noticeable. I told everyone to be quiet and listen. I cupped my ear with my hand and listened in the direction of the girl. I couldn't quite make out what the sound was. Then it hit me. The ice is breaking, I said. Someone had to go out there and get her now. My friends paced back and forth, wondering what to do now. If they weren't going to act on it, I was. I took a couple of deep breaths, braced myself, and then cautiously stepped out onto the ice. My trio of friends stopped pacing and saw that I was going out onto the pond. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Gerard asked, in a somewhat shocked manner. "Don't go out there, please. Just wait until the police get here." Elijah beckoned, but I couldn't wait. If I did, she would fall through. The adrenaline was really flowing now. I couldn't help but smile just a little bit and let out a nervous chuckle. I tried to walk as fast as I could, but it seemed like I wasn't going fast enough. I tried to keep calm and proceeded to step cautiously. My eyes were fixated on the ice below my feet. "Wow, you really are quite the crazy individual, aren't you?" I muttered under my breath. I heard it crack again. The goofy grin I wore suddenly vanished. I stopped for a second only to notice that the ice wasn't cracking below me. I sped up just a little bit more, still watching the ice, making sure that I didn't make it crack in the process. As I got closer, I looked up and saw the girl with a little more definition. She was so pale, almost as white as the snow. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light from the moon, but it looked like she was shining. It looked like she was covered with ice or frost or something. I questioned whether or not if she was even alive at this point. But then, how else would she be standing on the ice? I asked myself. Just then, she let out a noise, something that was barely audible, but nonetheless a noise. I tore off my jacket and extended the warm article of clothing, hoping she would take it. "Don't worry, sweetie. Everything's going to be all right," I said reassuringly. I was almost close enough to put the jacket on her, and that's when I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. She wasn't standing on the ice. There was a patch of ice that I failed to see before, right behind her, that was broken. There was something protruding from the frigid water holding her up. This pale, gray, spiked tentacle. My eyes widened as it squeezed her. That's when I came to the realization that it wasn't the ice that was about to break, when I heard her ribs snap and a wet gurgle escape her mouth. As it squeezed her, blood dripped from her mouth and from the wounds that the spikes had made in her torso. I looked down at the gaping hole in the ice. To this day, I still don't know what the hell I saw. It was this pale gray thing, covered head to toe with pitch black veins, and jagged spikes covered its entire body. It had these huge crimson eyes bordered in black, and when it smiled, I saw two sets of rotted, yellow fangs. I dropped my jacket. I could hear my heart pounding louder and louder. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't allow me. The corpse of the young girl was suddenly pulled through the hole that the creature had made, and I saw it swim off. My eyes darted back and forth across the ice, wondering where it went. It didn't even dawn on me that my friends were halfway across the ice when I saw them making their way toward me. I tried to yell at them, I tried to tell them to run, but all that came out was this pathetic whimper. They called my name, pleading that I hurry and come to shore with them before I fall through the ice too. I pushed past my fear and made my feet move. I ran as fast as I could, trying not to slip on the ice. Run. Get the hell off the ice, I warned them. They extended their hands to me and started walking my way again. Come on, hurry up, Gerard yelled back. Just go. Just go get off the ice now, I hollered back, desperately pleading for them to run. Just then, I felt cold water and a jagged edge at my ankle. I fell and bumped my head on the cold surface. Before I knew it, I was being pulled into the icy depths of the pond. When my body was submerged in the water, it felt like 1,000 daggers cutting into my skin. When the water hit my eyes, I thought the liquid inside was going to freeze. I immediately closed them. I tried not to scream from the pain. I had to conserve my air. But then I felt the tentacle cut into my ankle and another tentacle reach around my shoulder and squeeze. It kept pulling and pulling. It dislocated my shoulder. I couldn't do it anymore. I screamed, letting out almost all of my air. I thrashed trying to break free. That only caused its spikes to cut deeper, allowing the frigid water to freeze my bloodstream even faster. I felt the warm tears behind my eyelids and the burning in my lungs. I tried to scream one last time, but it started choking me with its tentacle. The spikes tore into my throat, and I opened my eyes again. Then I saw it. Those red eyes looked even more menacing now that it was up close. It wore a sinister smile as it licked my face. I started to feel lightheaded. This was the end. No, I thought to myself, I am not dying like this. I pushed past the pain in my shoulder, raised my hands to its mouth and started widening its jaw. It squirmed, trying to shake me. I felt the tentacles loosen and its teeth cut into my hands. I looked up and saw 3 hands submerged into the water. I was so exhausted by that point, but I had to keep fighting. I kicked, I squirmed, and I did what I had to in order to free myself. I used more force on its jaw, and I felt it crack. It let out this god-awful screech, let me go, and swam off into the cold darkness below. I could feel the water start to enter my lungs. I tried to swim to the surface, but I was just so tired. I was barely able to extend my hand toward my friends. The last thing I remember seeing was the light of the moon before everything went dark. I awoke the next morning to the beeping of a heart monitor. I was in the hospital. I was covered with the thickest, warmest blankets ever. I tried to move, but when I did, pain shot through my entire body. My head, shoulder, throat, ankle, everything was just throbbing from the pain. My friends walked into the room, saw that I was awake and rushed over. They told me that they were able to grab a hold of me, pulled me from the water, and rushed me to the hospital. They then bombarded me with questions pertaining to what pulled me into the water. Trust me, I said, very weakly. You don't want to know. Well, are you going to tell the cops what happened? Michelle asked. I decided to just tell the police that I was drunk and felt like doing something adventurous. Cause, let's face it, would they seriously believe me if I told them some water monster lured me out there and tried to kill me? Yeah, given the right state of mind, I wouldn't fall for it either. Needless to say, I don't partake in any more heroic acts. I also haven't been anywhere near water since. I've obtained a phobia of it, as you can well imagine. After college, my friends and I went our separate ways, did our own things. I have a family now, and so does Elijah. We get together sometimes for playdates and reminisce about old times. Some parts are left out. It doesn't really matter though. I still have nightmares about the night. That thing under the ice. Its crimson eyes. I always tell myself that it happened a long time ago, and I try to put it behind me. It usually helps. Up until 2 weeks ago, Alicia had taken her boys, my son and my daughter ice skating. She took them to her late father's house by the lake. It was just them there. When she brought them home, my son said something that sent a chill up my spine. He said that he saw a very pale girl standing on the ice, and by her feet was a pale gray bump with 2 red dots.